everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, as we're all aware, we have a big agenda here, so we'll keep things moving right along. Good afternoon. This is Council Vice Chair Cummings. It's Wednesday, August 11th, 2021. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 has caused us to alter our meeting procedures, and the Metropolitan Council Chair has determined that it is not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings due to the pandemic. The Metropolitan Council and its committee and advisory committees will conduct meetings in accordance with Minnesota statutes section 13D.021, and members will participate by telephone or other electronic means. Given that it is not feasible for the public to attend these meetings in person, the council will permit pre-registered members of the public to comment during the public invitation portion of this virtual meeting. The public is encouraged to monitor this meeting remotely via our website and YouTube. The public may also submit comments to public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond promptly. During this meeting, I'll ask that the council members utilize the wave or hand feature on the WebEx software to indicate that they would like to speak. I will call on members in the order I see their virtual hand. Members who are using a phone connection only should speak up when I call for any other discussion on the item. Sometimes it's hard to see everybody on the screen, so if I don't see your hand, please just speak right up. I ask again that members state their name when they're speaking to ensure members of the public can follow our discussion with ease. Because of the virtual nature of this meeting, we will call the roll for each business item. And when we do so, Liz will call the roll in alphabetical order. If there are no questions, I will call the meeting to order by taking attendance by roll call to ensure we have a quorum for this meeting. Liz, would you please call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Barber.
Here.
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee. Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musset. Sterner.
Present.
Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
And Zurin.
Present.
We have a quorum, so we will begin the meeting. The agenda is assumed to be approved if there are not any changes proposed and does not require a roll call. Are there any changes that anyone would like to make to amend this agenda? Seeing none, we will accept it as it was posted and move on to approval of the minutes. So these minutes would be from the July 28th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Vento move.
Lindstrom seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any changes or any discussion? Hearing none, Liz, can you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
And Zurin.
Aye.
Great, the minutes are approved. Moving on, we come to our public invitation for interested persons to address the council on matters that are not on the agenda. We generally take public comment on the agenda items during their respective committees. I don't have anyone that I'm aware of that has pre-registered, but I will ask if there is anyone in the public who would like to make a comment on something that is not on the agenda. Hearing and seeing no one, we'll move into the business portion of the meeting. So we have joint reports from Transportation Management and Community Development Committees. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first business item we have today is business item 2021-143 JT, which is the 2021 second quarter unified budget amendment, which incorporates changes to the 2021 operating and capital budgets reviewed by the Community Development Committee on July 19th, the Transportation Committee on July 26th, the Environmental Services Committee on July 27th, and the Management Committee on July 28th. This amendment adds an assumed 2% increase in salary and wages and accompanying increase for benefits to the budgets of the regional administration and community development departments, and slightly increases the allocation to the operating divisions. It aligns the 7 projects approved by the council in April for advancing racial equity in the region and in the RA and community development budgets. Two new procurement positions are added to the RA budget due to the increased workload of the new transit lines and projects. The amendment also allows for environmental services to return $668,000 of unused sewer water grant funds that will be allocated that were allocated by the 2016 council to the general fund. These funds will be included in the 2022 preliminary budget proposal to the council to support water supply planning operations. In the transportation operating budget, the amendment authorizes $10 million in MVEST funds to be transferred from the Metro Transit operating budget to the capital program, and $10 million in federal funds to be transferred from the capital program to the operating budget. The amendment also includes $250,000 appropriated this legislative session to create the plan to transition and maintain electric buses. The amendment brings in $9.9 million in federal pandemic funds for distribution to suburban transit providers through regional grant agreements. Moving to the capital budget, the amendment incorporates several items of the extremely successful 2021 legislative session. It allocates funds from the state fiscal year 2021 that were temporarily held back by the state due to funding concerns created by the pandemic, and additional funds appropriated from the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund for parks projects. The amendment includes $57.5 million for the BRT E and F lines appropriated this year. In environmental services, the amendment allocates funding among 4 projects in the ES Capital Improvement Program. In transportation, the amendment also recognizes $7 million in federal funds for the D-Line project and adds $11.4 million for the Orange Line BRT and $30.5 million for the Southwest LRT project from federal pandemic relief funds. The amendment also closes 7 projects completed by Metro Transit ACP and adds or reallocates funds to 36 projects in the Metro Transit Capital Improvement Program. The amendment closes 15 projects in the MTS ACP and adds or reallocates to 14 projects in the MTS Capital Improvement Program. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2021 Unified Budget Amendment in accordance with the attached tables.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Liz, would you like to call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Zer's aye.
Thank you. That motion carries. And council member, we are back to you, council member, for your second item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Second business item is business item 2021-187 JT, same week, which is another unified budget amendment. This budget amendment is for the 2021 Southwest LRT budget and incorporates a single change to the 2021 Transportation Capital Budget reviewed and approved by the Transportation Committee on August 9th and the Management Committee on August 11th. The amendment adds $200.3 million to the Southwest LRT project approved by Hennepin County on August 3rd and is consistent with the FTA requirement. As a result, the Metro Transit 2021 Capital Improvement Program is increased by $100 million and the remaining funds are incorporated into the ACP for the Southwest LRT project. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2021 unified budget as amended in accordance with the attached table.
Thank you, Councilmember Ferguson. Is there a second to that motion?
Second by Barber.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to make one quick comment.
Go
I
ahead.
think there's been a lot of public comment about just the costs related to this project, and I just want to make it clear that this council is very much paying attention to the costs and how the project is running and overseeing the project. And we have phenomenal staff led by Jim Alexander and running this project. And obviously, when you build a project that's the largest in the history of the state of Minnesota, there are some things that happen that that you're not expecting to have happen. But we're managing that effectively, and as we go through this process, we'll continue to look at all the budget amendments and all of the requests for changes, et cetera, in great detail to make sure that we are good stewards of the money of the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota and Hennepin County and the cities involved in this project.
Thank you for those comments. I think that's really important. I appreciate your bringing that to forward again. So thank you for that. So we have a motion and a second. And if there's no further discussion, Liz, would you like to call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
And that motion carries as well. Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda, we have 11 items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Yes, Chair, this is Sterner. I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, council member. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, council member. Liz, would you please call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
That motion carries as well. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to reports of the standing committees, and the first one up is Community Development. Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The first item that community development brings forward tonight is something of a housekeeping item. It's 2021-47, the Livable Communities Act funding availability, program guidelines, and scoring criteria. This is to amend a previously approved action by the council related to the Livable Communities Act application deadlines. Business item 2021-47 on the council's February 24th, 2021 meeting agenda included an application date for the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development Program that was later incorrectly listed in one of the program's outreach materials. Multiple communities have indicated their ability to submit an application would be greatly impacted if the council approved deadline of September 7th, 2021 was not extended to the deadline of September 27th, 2021 that was erroneously published. The below proposed action, the motion to amend a previously approved action, revises the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development deadline to September 27th, 2021 to accommodate a revised schedule that honors the erroneous date in the outreach material. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council amend Table 2 of Business Item 2021-47 to change the deadline for submitting LCDA TOD program grant applications from September 7th, 2021 to September 27th, 2021.
Thank you, council member. Just an important little housekeeping to address.
housekeeping.
Is there a second on that?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Chambliss. Thank you, council member. Liz, you would call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson, Atlas Ingebretson, Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
That motion carries. And council member Lilligren, you have a second motion to make, business item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second business item, item number 2021-200 is the approval of the City of Grant's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The City of Grant is located in District 12 of the Metropolitan Council area. It's located in West Central Washington County. It's designated as Diversified Rural by Thrive MSP 2040. The council has forecasted modest population, household, and employment growth during the 2020 to 2040 timeframe for the City of Grant. The plan maintains the established development pattern of larger rural lots and agricultural uses in a manner consistent with the council land use policies. And except for Matamidi School on its western boundary, the City of Grant does not have regional wastewater service, nor is it planned to have that service within the planning horizon. Our council staff found that the 2040 plan conforms to regional systems plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans for adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. First, to authorize the City of Grant to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, and also to advise the city that when available, provide to the council the date the Rice Creek Watershed District approved the local water management plan and the date the city adopts the final local water management plan.
Thank you, council member. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Thank you, council member Gonzalez. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing no hands raised. Liz, do you want to call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebretson, Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin. Zurin? I think your mic is off.
Looks like a crackly aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you.
And that motion carries as well. Thank you. Moving on to environment, the environment reports were on the consent agenda. Got you, Councilmember Zarin, thank you. So we'll move on to the management committee. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one business item in this portion of the agenda, and that is business item 2021-196. And that is the authorization to enter into a labor agreement with the Law Enforcement Labor Services Local 203 Police Supervisors. Metropolitan Council's labor agreement with Law Enforcement Services Local 203 expired on December 31st, 2020. The unit represents 38 sergeants, lieutenants, and lieutenants employed in the Metropolitan Transit Police Department. The parties reached a tentative agreement on June 7th, 2021, and the membership ratified the agreement on June 14th, 2021. Highlights of the agreement include a 2-year contract effective January 1st, 2021, with a 2% general wage increase in years 1 and 2 of the contract for all active employees. The wages and benefits negotiated in this agreement are consistent with the agreements in place with the Council's other labor unions. The cost of the labor agreement was reviewed by Finance and was negotiated within the economic parameters established by the Council. This item was reviewed and approved by the Management Committee on August 11th, 2021. Madam Chair, the Management Committee moves approval to authorize the Regional Administrator to enter into a labor agreement with the Labor Enforcement Labor Services Local 203 effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2022.
Thank you, Councilmember Ferguson. Is there a second to this motion?
Second by
A
Barber.
second? Thank you, Councilmember. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Liz, was someone speaking up? Nope. Okay, Liz, would you like to call the roll, please?
Atlas Pretson, Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin. Zurin?
Aye.
Right, thank you.
A crackly aye. Motion carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to transportation, Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, I bring 4 items to you tonight. The first is business item number 2021-173, a same week item to award a design and engineering contract for the Metro B Line project. The B Line will upgrade and substantially replace Route 21, Metro Transit's second highest ridership bus route that runs along Lake Street, Marshall Avenue, and Selby Avenue. A request for proposals was issued March 24th. There were 21 registered plan holders, including 18 prime consultants, 1 subcontractor, and 2 plan rooms. 8 of the plan holders identified as minority women, small or disadvantaged business enterprises. The council received 3 proposals. In accordance with the Brooks Act procurement process, the evaluation panel ranked and selected Kimley Horn as the most technically qualified proposer. Following evaluation, the negotiation panel opened the price proposal and conducted negotiations. The panel agreed that the final prices are fair and reasonable. The Office of Equal Opportunity set a DBE goal of 16% for the contract. The Office of Equal Opportunity has determined that Kimley Horn and Associate has met the DBE requirements of this contract. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the Regional Administrator to award and execute Contract 20P322 with Kimley Horn and Associates Incorporated for design, engineering, and construction administration for the Metro Beeline project in the amount not to exceed $9,785,510. A same week council action is requested to ensure timely advancement of the Beeline.
Thank you, council member. Is there a second?
Councilmember Fredson, I'll second.
Thank you, council member. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Liz, would you please call the roll?
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Zern's aye.
That motion carries. Thank you very much. And back to you, council member Barber, for your second motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2021-190 is regarding funding for the anticipated upcoming 2-year project development phase of the Metro Purple Line BRT project. This agreement embodies transfer of the local lead agency from Ramsey County to the council for final project delivery, ownership, and operation. Commitment and authorization of full funding for the project development phase is a requirement for FTA for projects seeking entry into the Capital Investment Grant Program and a requirement of the council for moving forward with the release of consultant requests for proposals and further recruitment of project staff. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the capital grant agreement number 21I040 for project development with Ramsey County and Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority for the Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Project in an amount not to exceed $39,900,000.
Thank you, council member. Is there a second?
Bento seconds.
Thank you, council member. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Liz, could you call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Zern is aye.
And that motion carries as well. Thank you. And back to you, council member Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2021-191 is regarding the framework for MnDOT's role and responsibilities associated with the overall delivery of the Metro Purple Line BRT project. This agreement sets the collaborative relationship between the council as the new local lead agency for the project and MnDOT, the primary non-funding project partner. MnDOT staff supplement council staff expertise in several technical areas, including but not limited to engineering and design management, structural design, right-of-way acquisition, utilities, permitting, and contaminated soils. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the cooperation agreement 21I037 with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for the Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Project.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Bento seconds.
Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Liz, do you want to call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
And that motion carries. Councilmember Barber, your final business item.
I think someone's trying to get your attention.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, pardon me.
Yes, Councilmember Bento, now I see you. Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Barber. I just wanted to note that our staff, Craig Lamothe and Charles Carlson, are with us tonight, and they have done a great job in helping helping transition this project to the council. And I have really benefited from their wisdom numerous times. So as we go forward with this, if you get any questions, I'd strongly encourage you to get a hold of Craig. He's a wealth of wisdom, and he's had a lot of experience with transit projects here in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very good. There are certainly complicated and oftentimes questions come up. So it's great to know that we have the experts that we can turn to whenever we have questions, and that they're happy to answer and answer in terms that we can understand, which is always important. So anyone else? Okay, I'll throw it back to you, Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2021-192 is to execute the 7th Amendment to the Capital Grant Agreement with Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority to add $200,315,255, bringing the total grant amount to $878,080,704. In November 2018, Hennepin County committed an additional $200.3 million as a prerequisite of the Federal Transit Administration's full funding grant agreement to demonstrate the financial capability to support the project contingency. The $200.3 million was committed at that time, but not released to the project. It is important to note that this is not new funding. The addition of the $200.3 million in already committed funds will replenish the project's contingency and will allow the project to continue construction elements of the half-mile LRT tunnel in the Kenilworth corridor. This does not change the overstride structure of the change orders. Change orders will continue to require approvals by the Executive Change Control Board and the Metropolitan Council when appropriate. At this time, it is unknown if funding beyond the $200.3 million will be needed to complete the project. However, if it is determined more funding is needed, the project is fully committed to working with our project partners to find a solution. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the 7th Amendment to the Capital Grant Agreement with Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority to add $200,315,255, bringing the total grant amount to $878,080,704.
Thank you, Councilmember. I also would like to note that Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen has rejoined our meeting. So is there a second to that motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Ferguson, a second.
Thank you. And is there any further discussion on that motion? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assuming this vote goes as planned, I just want to thank all of you and to thank all of our project staff. When you look at the four motions that the Transportation Committee has brought to the council tonight, you can see that we really are reflecting a commitment to a comprehensive transportation system that addresses all areas of the region and really starts to connect our system across different cities and counties. And I think it's really, really a significant move. So just really thank you all for your commitment, and thanks to all the staff who've supported all of these items we're going through tonight.
And thank you, Chair Barber, for chairing the Transportation Committee. That's, it's a ton of work, and you do a wonderful job of chairing that committee. And it's very exciting to see all this activity around our transit system expanding in such a robust way. It's just very exciting to be a part of that. Any other comments, discussion, questions? Oh, okay, and some applause going there. Thank you. Okay, seeing or hearing no more discussion, Liz, would you like to call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Aye.
Lindstrom, Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
That motion carries. We next have a joint report of the Environment and Community Development Committee, and this will be Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The joint report comes forward with recommendations from the Environment Committee and from the Community Development Committee. It's business item 2021-184. It's to authorize the City of Lexington their 2040 comprehensive plan and approve their comprehensive sewer plan. The City of Lexington in District 10 is connected to the regional wastewater system. Therefore, this item was reviewed by both the Community Development and Environment Committee. Council staff has found that the 2040 plan conforms to regional systems plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. The recommendation from the Community Development Committee is to authorize the City of Lexington to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city to A, provide the council the date of the watershed district approval of the local water management plan and the date the city adopts the final local water management plan when available. B, provide the council with a copy of the final adopted local water management plan that will be included in the final plan document that the city adopts. And C, implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation and forecasts. The recommendation from the Environment Committee is to approve the City of Lexington's comprehensive sewer plan.
Thank you, Council Member. Is there a second?
Second, Lindstrom.
Thank you, Council Member. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands raised. Liz, will you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
That motion carries as well. Thank you. Moving on to other business, we have business item 2021-213, the formation of Metro Transit Police Work Group. The purpose of forming this work group is to facilitate the police review. In June of 2020, Chair Zelli announced that the Metropolitan Council, in fulfilling our oversight role, will be conducting a comprehensive review of the Metro Transit Department's policing policies, practice, and relationships, and that this review would inform our ongoing efforts to improve transit security and customer experiences on our region's transit system. In July of 2020, the Metropolitan Council began working with the Citizens League to develop and implement a robust community engagement strategy to guide this work. The Citizens League addressed the Metropolitan Council on August 4th, 2021 on its findings. The work group will build upon Citizens League work by developing a series of Metropolitan Council Committee of the Whole discussions in formulating recommendations. The work group duties are: number one, design a series of Committee of the Whole discussions, and two, develop recommendations for consideration by the full council. The work group will complete its work and report back to the council by February 28th, 2022, at which time the group's work will be completed and the work group will end unless the council determines that the group should be continued for an additional period of time to address any items identified for further consideration. At this time, I would entertain a motion that the Metropolitan Council approve Chair Zelli's recommendation to form an internal Metro Transit Police Work Group through March 2nd, 2022, and appoint the following members to serve on the work group: Reva Chambliss, Chair; Linnea Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chris Fredson, Robert Lilligren, Abdi Mousse, Philip Sterner, Susan Vento, and Wendy Wolf, as described in Business Item 2021-213. Is there a motion?
Wolf moves.
Thank you, Council
Second.
Member. Is there a second?
Second by Barber.
Second by Barber. Any discussion? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really excited about this, and certainly as an extension of the work that the Citizens League is doing. I know sometime back I had hoped that maybe one day we could even have a public safety committee, but I think that given how the workflow is going, this is right on. Time is great to do this. I really would have loved to have served on this committee, but I appreciate the members that are being appointed here tonight and the work that they have ahead. One thing I would hope, because I really have a great interest in this topic and have, I think, expressed that all along, is that the work group maybe touch base with council every now and then, just to let us know what you're learning and finding out along the way, if that would be possible, future Madam Chair. For those of us, because we've got almost, just less than quorum on this work group. So just keeping maybe some of the points that you're learning along the way, or things that are evolving into major topics that we'll be seeing in March. For me, it would just be helpful so that I can kind of follow along, and certainly I'm sure I could tag in and maybe sit in on the work group, but just more so wanting to, follow along. And when you finally present some of your recommendations and we determine if this work needs to go forward, I just really want to be there with you guys 100%. And at the same time, kind of get some of my own thoughts and ideas woven into what you're doing. So I just, again, really applaud this work. Thank Chair Zelli for everything he's doing, and really appreciate the service that this group will be putting forth in this effort.
Thank you, Council Member. Councilmember Chambliss?
Yes, Judy, thank you. I think that's a great idea to have the periodic updates come to the council. It's been a topic of interest for me since I've been on the council, and I'm glad to see that we had a very robust review by the Citizens League, and that work is going to continue with a robust review of our policies and working with the council members on the work group, as well as other constituencies that can help us to ensure that we have better public safety options in our region. Looking forward to working with everyone.
Thank you, Council Member, and thank you for chairing this important committee. Other comments? I think these work groups have proven to be really, really effective and really important, and I appreciate that. I mean, we have several now. We have housing and transportation, and now the police work group, and just not as decision-making bodies, but working with staff to help inform policy and then bringing periodic reports to the full council. I think it's been really, really helpful. I know that I get a great deal out of it. So I appreciate this committee as well and everyone who's willing to put in more time and effort and thought on this. So thank you for that. So is there any other discussion? We have a motion and a second, and if there's no further discussion, Liz, do you want to call the roll, please?
Atlas Singebretson,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
and Zurin.
Aye.
Great, that motion carries. So that is all of our business for this evening. Now we're going to move into an information item, which is the preliminary 2020 operating budget and levies. I know it's an in-depth presentation, and I think we'll be hearing from many voices, and there'll likely be many questions. So I will welcome Marie Henderson and staff, and thank you for being here. We're looking forward to your presentation. Do you want us to ask questions as you go along? Will you be pausing periodically, or how would you like to handle any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can handle questions as they come up. It'd be
Okay.
nice if you could interrupt us as we talk. We can't always see the hands raising, but happy to answer along the way.
Great, thank you. And we look forward to your presentation. It's all yours.
Great. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Marie Henderson, and I am the acting Chief Financial Officer for the council. And today you will hear from finance directors and division leaders about the preliminary 2022 operating budget and levy. This presentation contains the financial numbers for the budget, but it also contains the stories of how the budget dollars will be used to benefit the region. We can go to the next slide. So while there have been discussions at the committees about the division level budget, tonight is the first opportunity to see and hear about the proposed operating budget as the whole. The preliminary budget is not the end of our budget development cycle. It's just a step along the way. We do have 2 statutory deadlines that are highlighted red on our budget development timeline. The budget we are proposing today and will ask for your adoption of it at the council meeting on August 25th establishes the upper limit to our property tax levy. After September 1st, the council may lower the levy, but not raise the total levy amount. Metro area counties will consider our levy amount in establishing their own budgets and tax levies, and will mail out truth in taxation notices to property owners showing the proposed amount of property taxes from all taxing jurisdictions. As we move along our budget development timeline through the public comment draft and to final adoption of our budget in December, we can and historically have adjusted our operating budget. However, we cannot make budgetary changes that would increase our levy. Our primary focus today will be on the operating budget, which is our operations, pass-through debt services, and other post-employment benefits, and our property tax levy. In October, after discussions have been taking place at the committee level, we will come back to highlight the capital program, which will consist of our authorized projects, our 6-year plan, and our proposed spending in 2022. So next slide, please. Council members, we refer to the preliminary operating budget presented today as the regional administrator's recommended budget as required by statute to be submitted by the council for approval. Ultimately, this will go through public comment and final adoption. It becomes the council's budget. Next slide, please. First, I'm going to be covering the focus of the proposed 2022 property tax levy. So next slide. The council has authority in state statute to levy a property tax in the metro area for specific purposes to fund our grant and loan programs, debt service obligations, and in a limited way, our general purposes. We have two main sections of our levy. First is our non-debt service levy, and the second is the debt service levy. In our non-debt service levy limit increases each year in accordance to the measure of government inflation called the implicit rate deflator. Over the past 10 years, the average increase has been around 2%, although we have seen years that it's been less than a 1% growth. For 2022, the increase is at 2.73%. Just in comparison, in 2021, this was a 2.9%. Our debt service levies are not limited by this inflation rate, but for transit and parks are effectively limited by the statutory authorized granted to us to issue debt. Our wastewater debt is secured primarily through wastewater fees, but secondary by the full faith and credit of the council, though we have never needed to levy for wastewater debt service. Next slide. The council has set a levy strategy in setting the amount for the levy. We have some givens within our levy strategy. First, we need to meet our debt service needs for parks and transit. And second, we also receive $5 million annually from the fiscal disparities to the tax base revitalization account. The levy strategy also includes decisions from the council. We have held the total levy increase to 2% annually. Last year, due to the pandemic, you may recall that we had a 0% levy increase. The proposal this year is to go back to the council's historical increase of 2%. Through our livable communities and general purpose levies have limited growth by statute, we propose to continue to maximize those levies so that they can support the transit-oriented development component within the Livable Communities Demonstration Account grant program and to provide flexibility to fund target priorities initiatives of the council. And finally, we continue to have significant funds in the Highway Right-of-Way program, and therefore we do not need to levy for that purpose. Next slide. Looking at our levy givens, it is a balance between our debt service levies and our non-debt service levies. Our debt service pressures from transit impact the sustainability of our overall levy strategy into the future. The primary use of a regional transit bonding is for fleet replacement, and we have successfully, with the legislation, in gaining an increase of our annual bonding authority that reflects a 4.5% inflation in those bus replacements. It's a big deal for the capital program, but places pressure on the levy needed to repay the debt of our desire of historical stay within a 2% growth. These pressures would indicate a need for a higher annual growth of our total levy, but historically we have been able to manage within that 2%. Excuse me. Because we have been able to manage that 2% because of our Highway Right-of-Way program, our park debt service have not been providing as much pressure on the levy. So next slide. Reviewing the non-debt levy section, the tax base revitalization fiscal disparity is $5 million received from the Fiscal Disparity Fund. The Fiscal Disparity Program is a tax-based sharing program within the metropolitan area and is funded by commercial and industrial property, not the homeowners. The Livable Communities Demonstration Account has been growing by the general implicit price deflator. The 2022 levy is proposed at $13 million. By maximizing this levy, the strategy is to create a transit-oriented development component within the Livable Communities Demonstration Account grant program. The current goal is to reach an annual levy of 13.2 million that is annually funded as 7.7 million demonstration account program, 5 million for the transit orientation development program, and $500,000 required in statute for local housing incentive account. A 2% increase in this goal will be achieved by 2023. So next slide. We maximize our general purpose levy as these are the most flexible dollars. Our non-debt service levy limits increase each year in accordance to the measurement, like I said, of the government inflation rate. And over the past years, 10 years, that's been around 2%. So that's a 2.73% this year. Primarily, the general purpose levy is used for community development administration and local housing of $1 million, which will leave us around 3.2 million for one-time targeted initiatives. These targeted initiatives are for one-time uses of pilot or bridge programs or other funding sources. The strategy around advancing equity in the region or any items that the council sees that they want to invest in within the limits of the general fund. So next slide. If we place all of these requirements and givens together and the strategies that we've talked about, this chart breaks down the proposed property tax levy of the $90.5 million. The total proposed levy increases 2%, and a few things to note on this slide. If it wasn't for the highway right-of-way program, our non-debt service levies are all at their statutory maximum. Second, unlike other municipal entities, the council's general purpose levy is at $16.58 million, which funds less than 2% of our operations. So next slide, just to kind of put this in context, our levy is shared across the 7-county metro area, except the transit debt service levy, which is shared by a smaller area serviced by our transit services, which is the transit capital levy communities. This map highlights our metro area and the transit taxing area. The 7-county metro area minus going kind of counterclockwise is Hanover, Rockford, New Prague, and Northfield. And the blue area equals the transit taxing district established in statute. When you add the red and the blue areas, that's the transit capital levy communities. So next slide. So what is the impact to the council's levy to the taxpayer? Here we have a typical $250,000 homeowner, with the caveat here that all things being equal year over year, if that homeowner resides within the transit taxing communities, they would pay $47.89. And if you were outside the transit tax community, you would pay $17.12. As you know, not everything is equal year over year, and individual taxpayers will have different experiences depending upon factors like increasing home values. So next slide. The council has and will continue to be good stewards of its levy. Putting our levy in context with other metro area taxing jurisdictions, the council has a declining share of revenue from property taxes paid by metro area residents and receives about 1.4% of those revenues. So next slide. If I'm not seeing any questions, we are going to move over to the operating proposed budget of 2022. We start with an overall look of our operating budget and follow up with drilling into each division's budget. The 2022 proposed operating budget is $1.3 billion. It represents a $127 million increase, or 11% from the 2021 adopted budget. This slide notes the breakouts between operating pass-through, debt service, and other post-employment benefits, corresponding to last year's adopted budget. Our OPEB funds reflects our fully funded status of a retiree healthcare liability and the earnings on OPEB fund balance to pay retiree medical premiums. For our 2022 OPEB is expected for the reserve balance to remain neutral as we continue to watch that fund closely. Pass-through funding is relatively stable year over year. The changes primarily reflect timing of the drawdown and disbursement grant funds as community completes their projects. We've already talked about the debt service pressures as it relates to the property tax levy, and Lisa will speak more about in detail the debt service pressures on environmental services budget. In operating, the 837 million year over year, on the right side of this chart, we burst out year over year change of operating categories and represents a $60 million increase or 7.7% over the prior year adopted budget. Breakout by category is salaries and benefits represent about 62% of our operating budget. An increase this year is 36 million over the adopted 2021 budget. The 2021 budget did not incorporate a planned wage salary increase, so a good part of this change is due to the presumed increase of 2% in 2021 and an additional presumed increase of 2% in 2022. 7 million increases in contracted services relate to our transit provider contracts and technology in hardware and software. The remaining operating expenses go up 16 million, many of which are driven by the pandemic and increasing costs of our technology infrastructure. So next slide. These pie charts show the uses and sources of our operating budget. The left side pie chart shows the budget breakout by division. And you will note that the RA budget is mostly allocated and reflected in the division's budget. The biggest story in this budget is on the pie chart on the right side regarding the sources and funding of this budget. Federal revenues continue to be rapidly increasing share of the budget, now representing 17% of the budget at 218 million. It's an increase of 36 million from last year's budget. For context, the adopted pre-pandemic 2020 budget included only 107 million in federal funds, where there will be more detail described of this change when we come to the transportation presentation. Fare revenue is projected to rebound slightly to 63 million, up from last year's 47 million, but barely half of what 2020 budget forecast is at 113 million. And again, transportation, we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. We'll also note that MVEST is forecast at 349 million, and the amount is back in line with prior forecasts. We will adjust this budget prior to the final adoption to reflect the November forecast. Property taxes support about 7% of our operating budget, but as you saw in the previous slides, primarily this funds our debt service and our grant programs and is only about 2% supporting our operations. Other income of 28 million is primarily investment income and within our OPEB plan assets. We have planned use of reserves in the operation, primarily within the transportation debt service of 79 million, and we'll talk about that in the transportation area. So next slide is the general fund. And we'll give you an overall picture of the proposed budget and how the plan to shift gears into the divisional level budgets, starting with the general fund. So at the council, we use our general fund to account for activities in regional administration and community development. The sources of funding for the general fund, shown on the middle of this slide, are primarily RA costs allocated to the operating divisions and our general purpose property tax levy. One-time initiatives and statutory transfers funded by the general purpose levy make up the remainder. And on the expense side or uses category, salaries and benefits represent about 53% of our operating budget. So next slide. For each of our operating funds, the council has established reserve targets. For the general fund, that reserve is 10% of the operating expense. Our reserve target for 2022 is 9.6 million, and the projected year-end reserve amount is just over 12 million. Next slide. For regional administration, the proposed budget for 2022 is 86.8 million. This is about a 15.6% increase from 2021. Like I said earlier, in 2021, that budget did not include salary increases. So the increases in this budget is really 2 years. It's an assumed increase of 2021 and again in 2022. Part of the 15.6% is also additional investment into our business process and system integration program. This is the second year for this investment into this long-term project with IT. Also, this increases include hardware and software when we're moving to cloud-based services versus physical assets, support for additional transit lines, and the need to invest in our information technology security. The uses on the left can be subdivided into 4 categories that are illustrated in this chart. Categories include administrative services, which includes the management of the overall council decision-making process, internal review of council programs and finances, legal representation, and relationships with other government agencies and the legislator. Business services include communications and community relations, management of council records, and recruitment and retention of council employees. Financial services includes budgeting, accounting, and financial reporting, procurement, and management of council risk. And lastly, information services providing computer services, geographical informations to city programs. In the middle graph, you'll see that uses, our budget is more than 56% in salaries, followed by contracted services and IT maintenance, which includes hardware and software maintenance at 32%. The others mainly utilities, materials, and supplies. In the far right slide is the allocation, how that will impact the RA costs are allocated fully to the divisions, and that will be reflected in with the divisions. So with that, the next slide, we will go into the division conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Lisa Barajas, the Community Development Director, and I'm going to start off with our story before I turn it over to Heather to talk some numbers with you. Just as a reminder, in community development, I know most of you are familiar with our responsibilities, but just to sum up, that we have essentially 2 departments in community development. First, our Metro HRA, where we deliver housing assistance to tenants throughout our service area and operate a number of federal and state funded programs. And then in our regional planning departments, we perform long-range planning and guiding growth, planning for the regional parks and trail system, and planning for housing in the region. We work with local governments and implementing agencies to realize those plans, and this includes providing technical assistance and facilitating collaborations, and providing funding through our Livable Communities Act programs. And finally, performing all sorts of research and analysis that supports all of our work, both in our long-range planning, in our technical assistance, and in our Metro HRA. Next slide, please. just wanted to give you a high-level overview of how equity is in action in our community development budget. While we're one of the smaller budgets and we don't actually build things, so to speak, as you see in wastewater or in transit, you do see how it shows up in our budget in different ways. So just to walk through in general, as orientation, the two green columns on the left represent dollars that are passed through to clients or outside agencies or local governments. This is the largest component of where our money goes in community development. The two blue columns on the right represent more in-house activities or activities that our staff actually perform. This represents the how we do things, including our planning work and planning for new initiatives that we would implement in those green columns. Now, for just a bit of a flavor of our equity and action work today, the HRA pass-through program is highly regulated by HUD rules and regulations, but where we do have more direct control is the council adoption of things like our administrative plan, where there is discretion, in setting annual rent standards, including investment in higher cost communities. In our grant programs in 2022, we expect to pass through funds in our operating and capital budgets. In some of these programs, we are required to follow state formulas, but and where state formulas are in place, staff have worked to embed equity work earlier in the process at the planning level at that stage. A good example of this is in our regional parks department. Parks has established an equity analysis requirement for regional park and trail master planning, where agencies use an equity lens to better understand who benefits from the park and trail improvements. This is before we even get to the funding portion, so really at that upstream part of our process. We also can impact grant programs with investment strategies in terms of how much we program. An example of that would be additional investment in the local housing incentives account in the 2021 budget, which the council, as you recall, added nearly $4 million additional dollars to that program. Other places you have and will be able to impact equity is in scoring criteria, outreach, and engagement. And as you know, in 2020, our LCA staff evaluated the whole of the program to better orient scoring criteria, not just around what was being built, but in how the process engaged with those most likely to be impacted or benefited by the proposed projects. We are currently soliciting applications, and we will continue to monitor and evaluate how well our scoring criteria are meeting the statutory goals and priorities of the council. On the blue side of this slide, in our annual work plan, you'll see this is what really drives our work and is one of the largest budgetary decisions that the Community Development Committee and the Council can make in that adoption of our annual work plan, which we typically do at the end of 2021 and early 2022. Division-wide, we can identify a number of initiatives, which I'll talk through a little bit later in my presentation today. But just as a reminder, equity goals are incorporated into all CD division staff performance reviews and work plans, and equity language is included in all of our job postings as well. Staff leadership and participation in professional development and personal growth and equity-based training, webinars, and discussions is encouraged and supported through our training budget as well. Just a couple of examples of what equity in action in our work plan looks like. I already mentioned the work that Livable Community staff have underway and that Parks has underway as well. Another item that we'll discuss and you'll hear more about is the historical cultural study for parks that our park staff are embarking on this year. That's a multi-year process that's really meant to shine a light on the historical and cultural significance of lands within the regional parks and open space system. The Metro HRA also has a number of initiatives that include outreach services for hard to house voucher holders to ensure housing choice in varying neighborhoods and areas of the region. I'll talk more about some additional programs that we'll have underway in 2022 as well. And that last column, contracts and consulting, our total projected spending on contracts and consulting is about $2 million. So in the scope of the council's overall contracting work, it's a pretty thin sliver of that overall pie. But we have connected with procurement and are looking at future projects and strategizing where we may be able to do more NCUB select procurements. So those are those under $175,000, where the bids go to only NCUB vendors. We'll also continue to work with OEO as they evaluate goals for future projects where there's not a targeted NCUB procurement. But I would remind our council too that in community development, development, most of our procurements are very small micro purchases and have been limited in this last year. Most of those purchases supported collaboration and engagement with our local governments, with residents and stakeholders in the region, and were for things like space rental and food. So we're really small procurements. Next slide, please. So really excited to talk about some big initiatives that I want to touch on for 2022. So I know you have heard me and other staff at different points over this last year discuss the Metropolitan Development Guide, what we currently call Thrive MSP 2040. 2022 will be the year when we really begin our public conversations in earnest. This year, you've been hearing and will continue to hear reports about our current state, such as what do newly adopted 2040 comprehensive plans say in aggregate. You've heard recently from our staff on the 2020 land use inventory, analysis of green spaces in the region over the last 40 years, and our updated regional forecast through 2050. We also have held developers panels to discuss some of these current issues, as well like COVID impacts on commercial and residential development. We will continue reporting out to you on what we're seeing today as we build our collective understanding of where we are today currently within this region and what forces or uncertainties we need to be aware of as we begin efforts to build a regional vision through 2050. You will be hearing more from all of our divisions in the coming year, as this is an integrated cross-divisional effort that takes significant staff support to accomplish. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see just some of the studies and research we have programmed in community development for completion in 2022. And I know that other divisions have similar types of study and research planned as well. Now continue to make my pitch to you when you hear these and each time we're coming to you of what else do we need to know? What other issues do we see on the horizon that we need to build a stronger understanding of as it relates to the Council's directive to plan for the orderly and economical development of the 7-county region? Next slide, please. So when I come to you this year to talk about Metro HRA, we have an entirely different story. As you will know, in the past, we were really struggling with making our budget be in the black. And we're finding that increasing rents and kind of stagnant congressional appropriations were leaving us not able to fully fulfill moving our vouchers forward. And this is a different story this year. We are in the best financial shape we have had in recent history, largely due to federal COVID relief. COVID relief funds are being passed through differently to housing than to transit. We are not getting a large grant award to the program, but we are getting assurances that federal funding will make us whole as we can fully issue all of our housing vouchers. We were able to build reserves in 2020 with CARES Act funds that are being applied to our 2021 budget. Under the American Rescue Plan of 2021, the HRA will receive 218 new emergency housing vouchers, which you've seen in actions before you very recently. The vouchers will help connect people experiencing homelessness to housing and housing stability. And these funds will be amended into the 2021 budget through an upcoming budget amendment and will be included in the HRA 2022 budget prior to final budget adoption. They're not currently included in the preliminary budget because we received our award after our preliminary budget was due to put this together. Our 2022 preliminary budget includes 2 new HRA staff. HRA may add 2 more FTE prior to public comment budget to manage caseload of the new emergency housing vouchers and to ensure compliance with federal regulations. And federal funds will support this additional FTE to both of these to the Metro HRA. I also just want to offer that quick reminder that we are unable to use our local dollars to run federal programs. Even if we want to invest more in housing vouchers, we essentially are not allowed to do so. Next slide, please. One program you'll hear more about in the coming year is our mobility program. So by way of background, families with housing choice vouchers may encounter barriers to using their vouchers in resource-rich communities. Some barriers may be financial, such as saving enough money for a security deposit or maintaining positive credit. Other barriers may include inadequate time to find a unit, landlord hesitation to rent to a voucher holder, or limited awareness of neighborhood amenities such as locations of schools, access to jobs, parks, or even daily convenience like groceries and doctors. Agencies, including our Housing and Redevelopment Authority, have implemented housing mobility programs to help reduce those barriers to families, to provide as much opportunity as possible, and to support families in having success with placing those vouchers. Next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, awarded the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority and the Metropolitan Council's HRA $5.2 million under the Housing Choice Voucher Mobility Demonstration Program. The demonstration builds on research that shows growing up in neighborhoods with lower levels of poverty improves children's academic achievement and long-term chances of success. The program will support Metro HRA and the MPHA, Minneapolis, in addressing barriers to increasing housing choices by offering mobility-related supports. The program will also include a rigorous, independent evaluation to determine which supports are most effective in helping families achieve success. In addition to the program funding, each of our 2 agencies was awarded 74 new vouchers to support the effort. Planning is currently underway to develop a 6-year budget, and funds will be included into the HRA budget prior to final adoption. We didn't have this award when final budgets were due, so that's why you're seeing this in the interim. HRA currently anticipates, as I mentioned, hiring up to 4 new FTEs to support work related to this award, and positions again will be supported with those federal funds. So I'll now turn to Heather to walk you through the numbers.
So the operations part of the community development budget is about $22 million. And as reflected in what Lisa just talked about half of our budget is in HRA administration, and the other half are the other programs. That would be our park staff, our research staff, our finance staff, all the other units. You heavily invest in us in staff and salary. So we do a lot of the work, we process a lot of the work, we do a lot of the research studies our own. There's about $4 million for contracted services. The majority of that is used for our property management contract, and some of those dollars also support some of the research that we do when we need to bring in additional support or additional expertise so we can manage our FTE count. We pay for our RA allocations like all the other divisions. We need IS, human resources, procurement support, and that helps us do our work. The other category are things, it's basic things like it's computers, it's laptops, it's printing, it's just the general office supplies that we need to do our work. Next slide, please. So our sources are really reflective of what you heard Marie talk about earlier in the presentation. So property taxes supports predominantly our staff. The federal dollars, the $6 million, that supports our HRA staff. The federal government pays for not only the housing vouchers, but we have administrative support. And that is the area that Lisa highlighted before that I just want to highlight again, is that we are in the black and we are actually to the place where we're building reserves. And that's just a really nice place, to be honest, to be right now. It allows us to do the work. It allows our staff to make sure that we are in federal compliance, because as you can imagine, it's a federal program. It's very highly regulated, and we need to make sure that we're staying in compliance with and staying in good standing with HUD. Next slide, please. Our pass-through budget is really robust. That's what Lisa talked to you about predominantly on the equity in action slide. So we pass through a huge amount of money in the HRA program in the terms of vouchers to private landlords. The livable communities money gets passed through for grants that you as the council award through the scoring criteria. The $9 million for parks is the parks O&M funding that we get through the state. The sources by category, it's just really reflective of our programs. The federal government pays for our housing vouchers. The state pays for parks. There's a little bit of housing money that the state provides too. And then the rest of it is the livable communities funds that Marie talked about earlier in the presentation. So with that, I will pause for Lisa and I to answer any questions you have about community development. Otherwise, I'll hand it off to environmental services. All right, next slide, please.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Lisa Thompson, General Manager of Environmental Services, and I'm happy to lead off our segment with, next slide, please. Our ES vision, to be a valued partner and leader in water sustainability. Our vision recognizes that we're only part of the total collection of organizations that play a role in water in the region. So we are striving to be seen by those other organizations as trusted for our expertise and our collaborative leadership, so that together we'll be successful in achieving the council goal to improve and maintain the quality and quantity of water in our lakes, rivers, streams, wetlands, and groundwater. There's a Japanese proverb that says a vision without action is a daydream. Our mission is what we do every day in order to achieve that vision, and it's the guide for action. Soon I'll hand off to Ned Smith, our Director of Finance, to share with you the budget resources needed to support our actions. But first, I'll share a few highlights of how we are carrying out our mission by treating wastewater and supporting effective planning and partnerships for sustainable water in pursuit of our ES vision. Next slide, please. Here is a visual reminder that Environmental Services has an extensive system of infrastructure spanning our region to provide those essential services to roughly half of our Minnesota population. Our staff are the brains and the heart of our operation, and it's remarkable how much is accomplished by 600 plus employees serving 2.8 million residents and treating 250 million gallons of water every day of the year. Next slide, please. On July 21st, all 9 of our treatment plants were recognized for another year of perfect compliance. These annual peak performance awards from NACWA are a leading indicator of the high level of excellence that we consistently achieve in providing our essential wastewater service to the public. Our Hastings facility ranks in the top 4 in the country for their record of 30 years. Next slide. When it comes to our water resource planning work, we emphasize being a partner and a resource to convene, facilitate, and provide technical and financial support. And since it's time to start reviewing our policies around water quality and quantity in preparation for the next water resources policy plan update, we're looking at additional ways to raise the engagement with our regional partners who use this plan to make informed decisions to protect and wisely use the region's water resources. We're fleshing out the concept of involving an external group of advisors consisting of city public works, planning staff, as well as watershed administrators to help guide the direction and development of the 2050 Water Resources Policy Plan. This will give folks an earlier opportunity to engage with the planning work than what we've done in the past. We're aiming to start those meetings sometime this fall. Next slide, please. Another of our newer engagements is a group called the Twin Cities Water Monitoring and Data Assessment Group, which is a mouthful. So that's been shortened to one of our more interesting acronyms, TCWA-MODAG, which is also not easy to say, but it's shorter. This is a partnership of public sector water resource practitioners who are collaborating to establish and promote standard practices for water monitoring, analysis, and data stewardship in the Twin Cities metro area. They meet several times a year, and they've had trainings on things such as how to do flow measurements, meetings to share info, and meetings to share current technology. The picture on the left of this slide shows our ES staff demonstrating how to sample for macro invertebrates. This specific event focused on sharing knowledge on biological activities like fish shocking, invasive species monitoring, and plant and algae surveying and identification. On the slide on the right, you'll see a picture of our participation in the annual Children's Water Festival. We've been active in that festival since the beginning, and in this photo, one of our staff is demonstrating stormwater runoff. The benefits for the region include working together to solve the problems of today, but collaborating and getting input from stakeholders and partners so we can protect the water for future generations. And most importantly, we all know that change isn't easy. So creating this network of change agents will help us improve our future. Next slide. Another important focus of our work is water supply planning. It's really important to keep our region on track with ensuring that we'll have adequate water supplies for our region's growth, livability, and prosperity. The scale and complexity of the region's water supply setting and all the changes that are expected due to planned growth and climate change is part of why the 2005 Minnesota legislature directed the council to carry out water supply planning activities. In our water supply planning work, we're also emphasizing partnering and being a resource to convene, facilitate, and provide technical and financial support. Next slide, please. Because the council is not a water supply provider or a regulator, it's crucial that we do our work relying on the experience of the metro communities. Since 2005, 50 people have been members of MAWSAC, Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, and over a dozen have served on the Technical Advisory Committee. And the number of communities participating in work groups, as you see on the maps on display, have increased from 20 to 72. Those partners have shaped the council's water supply planning work, and that includes technical investigations, regional and local planning, as well as implementing projects and programs. Next slide, please. My last slide is one of the more exciting things in terms of new news for ES. We have developed the capabilities to monitor the level of SARS-CoV-2 viral RNA and variant RNA particles in the Metro plant influent wastewater. We collect the samples and we work with the University of Minnesota Genomics Laboratory to do the analysis. And it's very exciting for us to see that the results are tracking closely with the clinical data for the Metro plant service area. So the graph you're looking at is basically the RNA particles that we're measuring and the cases of COVID that have been reported by the Department of Health. The red line represents the increase in the rise and fall of the RNA particles, and the gray represents the caseload. So you can see there's a close correlation. We've also been able to measure the variants. So we saw that between March and April, the Alpha variant was a principal, and then starting in June and July, it was the Delta variant. The Department of Health has been getting our information and data, and they're in discussions with us because they are interested in considering how our work could help their work, which we are super excited about. Next slide, please. And now I'll turn it over to Ned to give you the details on the numbers in our budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, council members, for having us here. Just a couple of highlights from our operating budget. We are going to increase the municipal wastewater charge across the system by 4%. That's a $250 million increase. Excuse me, that's a total of $250 million, which is a $9.6 million increase over 2021. And just as a reminder, 2021, we only increased by 2% because we were concerned with the uncertainty around the COVID virus. So we are bumping up a little higher than that, up to 4% for 2022. That translates to about $5.67 per year per household or residential equivalent connection. So a modest increase. Our sewer availability charge will have no change. It's been flat since 2014, and that's at $2,485 per SAC unit. A SAC unit is determined by also as a residential equivalent. And that'll make for a total transfer of $59.6 million, which also includes $9.5 million to help fund our pay-go, pay-as-you-go, using operating funds for capital projects. Our industrial waste strength charge will go up 5.4% for our 900 industrial customers. That's a little higher than our 4%, but that's based on the way the formula works. We start with our overall budget, and then we back out things that don't apply to the industrial waste treatment process, which includes our interceptors. So if our treatment costs are going up higher than the rest of the utility, then they'll see a slight bump there. And our industrial waste permit fees are pegged to our overall increase of 4%. And so that will be just 4% increase in our permit fees. Next slide, please. We always like to tout that we're a great buy, a great purchase for the region. We're incredibly competitive relative to our peer industries. Peer industries are those that process 100 million or 100 million gallons a day, or about 1 million people in the areas that they serve. We say we're 40%. That's creeping up a little bit. This is the most recent data that we have is from the 2020 Cost of Clean Water Index, which is it's an annual survey that the National Association of Clean Water does, Clean Water Association, that we will get more data in a matter of weeks from a more comprehensive study, and we'll have some better information on our competitiveness. But overall, we're 35 to 40% cheaper than the rest of the nation. So we do think that's an economic advantage for the Twin Cities region. Next slide, please. So where does that put us from a historic perspective? 2019 and 2020 were the first 2 years of our 5-year 4% promise. We had just about a 3.5% increase. 2021, as I mentioned earlier, we did drop that substantially to make sure that our cities were able to manage through the pandemic uncertainties. We have seen that the economy has remained strong, and our municipal wastewater collections have been consistent. We have not seen any city not pay their bills. So we are comfortable with doing a little bit of an increase in 2022. And we also think we're going to need to be a little higher in 2023 and beyond, closer to 5% to get some of that money back from 2021. Next slide, please. Just to see how it breaks down by department. Treatment services is our plants. Administration looks large at 28%, but administration includes all of our support services, centralized support services. Most significantly, information services and information technology is in there, as well as finance, HR, legal, and other centralized services support. Otherwise, it's spread across our groups pretty evenly. Interceptors is, of course, maintaining our collection system throughout 600 miles of collection system throughout the region. Support services is our lab and other process improvement areas. Maintenance services, of course, is our centralized maintenance group that keeps the system maintained. Planning and capital delivery is our construction, as well as our long-range planning for our wastewater system. Water resources planning is looking at the region and their long-term water resources. And then utility management systems is our environmental quality assurance and other regulatory compliance. In terms of by category, you can see our people are our biggest investment at 44%. The rest is spread pretty evenly across our various areas. And the most important thing to know here is these allocations are pretty consistent from years past. I say pretty because RA allocations is up a little bit because that's where information services is, and we have some pretty major, the whole council has some pretty major IT projects going in effect in 2022 or that they're working on implementing. So that should come down a little bit in the future, but we do see a slight bump there. Next slide, please. In terms of where does the money come from, you can see 92% come from our user fees, and that is including municipal wastewater charges, as well as our industrial customers. Other includes a $9.5 million transfer from SAC to help with our PAYGO, as well as a slight use of reserves to offer regulatory rate relief for our customers. It's important to point here, where is SAC? Overall, SAC is not included because this is just looking at our operating funds, and SAC by law can only pay a portion of our debt service. So that's why you don't see SAC as a revenue source here. Next slide, please. You can see our overall outstanding debt peaked in about 2018 at $1.4 billion outstanding. And then it's coming down. That also was a partial driver of our debt service bubble that happened, that is pretty much done in 2022. Debt service bubble is where we were seeing increases of $7 million to $10 million per year in our debt service, which was most of our MWC increase as well. So that was quite offsetting and difficult to manage through. But that bubble's over. We have been using reserves to manage a lot of that. So we are going to need to let our revenues catch up to our expenses in the coming years. But we do see debt service being relatively flat for the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide, please. And then just a couple of notes on SAC. The reason that SAC price can be flat for 14 years is because of the, since 2014, is because of the robust development we've seen throughout the region. An interesting trend we're seeing though, 2019 and 2020 really were driven by residential growth across all, well, 2019 was driven mostly by apartments. 2020, we're seeing it across all residential categories, single family home, multifamily, as well as apartments. So it's a little more even. And just as a side note, 2021 through May, which is the most recent month we have data for, we're seeing a 19% increase over 2020, which is interesting because the first 3 months of 2020 were pre-COVID in terms of the shutdown. So we're very encouraged to see that we're still seeing healthy SAC development. And not only is it healthy in total, but it's also, we're seeing commercial coming back. Commercials up also 19% over 2020. So SAC picture looks very positive. Next slide, please. Which leads to the positive outlook for our SAC reserve. Again, we're seeing some healthy development, which keeps our reserve healthy. The green line represents our council minimum balance, which is the average of 5 years of the SAC bill that will be used for debt service. But we always make sure to go back to 2002 because that's another time when the reserve was healthy, and you can see the quick decline that happens with a recession. So we are certainly keeping an eye on that, but we're also looking to use those reserves to help us manage through a recession to keep our rates reasonable. And with that, we will stand for any questions regarding ES operating budget. All right, hearing none, next slide, please. We'll turn it over to Ed in transportation, or Wes.
Madam Chair and council members, can you hear me?
Yes.
As we develop the 2022 transportation preliminary operating budget, our focus has been on making the transit system stronger and better. And today, there are so many factors that influence transit that we can't control. Changing work schedules, parking availability, and cost, congestion, and of course the public's response to the pandemic. So it is important that we focus our thinking at transit and our efforts on where we have the greatest influence on improving the customer experience. And this is the priority of our daily work. It's the priority of our planning and of our allocation of our limited resources. We are doing this work of planning budgets in a transit environment that is still dynamic, that is still transitioning, and it will be for some time. The budget we share today is appropriately titled a preliminary budget, a work in progress, more so this year than in any other year. The assumptions we make about ridership, routes, trips, fare revenues are all the foundation of our budget. And yet these assumptions attempt to anticipate travel habits that are still yet to be determined. In this preliminary budget, we plan to return to 95% of our pre-pandemic service levels compared to about 85% today. But in the end, actual travel demand and travel patterns will influence changes to this assumptions, as will our success in hiring operators in what has become a very difficult job market. So more than with any other past preliminary budget, this budget will receive further review and development between now and the October public hearing draft. And of course, there will be more changes driven by the next forecast and other influences between the public hearing draft and the final budget that's adopted in December. Again, as we develop this budget with a focus on becoming a stronger, better transit system, and we develop this budget on becoming more responsive to what our customers need and expect from us. This preliminary 22 operating budget increases our presence on transit to improve safety and to better address the customers' onboard needs. We are adding resources that will improve the upkeep of our existing facilities and bus stops, and we are making meaningful investments to advance equity through our services and within our organizations. We will continue to prioritize and protect our core local routes as we add back service. We are funding a full year of Metro Orange Line services and the start of Metro D-Line services that are planned to begin in 2022. And we will be using technology to improve how we communicate with our customers, including to those with limited English proficiency and customers who are blind or with low vision, anticipating that our current pilot will be successful. We're adding funding to increase our public engagement partnerships with community-based organizations, and this budget also adds a new position that will focus on improving our MCUB performance, our MCUB contracting performance. This is really intended to get us more upstream in our procurement and contracting process, which is critical to an agency that is so complicated and so vast, with more than 300 managers and supervisors that have an opportunity to touch our procurement process. We are working with Marcy Simon to add human resources to bring what will help us develop a more strategic and forward-thinking approach to workforce development, and we will continue to increase our investments in the Transit Assistance Program, better bus stops, and the Homeless Action Team with funding to contract with mental health professionals. So, Madam Chair, with your permission, I'll hand it off to Amy Venowitz before Ed and Heather walk through your overview slides.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. Madam Chair and members, just a couple points about the MTS budget. As you're aware, our budget includes both some forms of transit operations, including regular route contracted services, Metro Mobility, Transit Link, and Metro Van Pool, along with transportation planning funding. So MTS provides regular route services similar to Metro Transit through contracts with private providers. The budget assumptions that you will see today align with Metro Transit's budget assumptions, again with service returning approximately to pre-pandemic levels and ridership expected to be at about 55% of pre-pandemic levels, along with Metro Transit's ridership levels. Our other big MTS transit service is Metro Mobility, the ADA transit service. This one is a little bit different than regular route service. As you know, Metro Mobility is an on-demand door-to-door service, and for many of our certified riders, this is their primary, if not only, form of transportation. So what we have been seeing is that Metro Mobility ridership is returning to pre-pandemic levels much more quickly than regular route services, and of course, this has a budget impact. In 2022, we are assuming that ridership hits the pre-pandemic levels, and thus our budget also will be returning to pre-pandemic levels. And as you know, the fare recovery on Metro Mobility is only about 10% of the cost for that program. So looking forward, the good news on Metro Mobility is that due to legislation passed just this session, that beginning in state fiscal year 2026, Metro Mobility will become what is known as a forecasted program. This means that the state will assume responsibility for the net costs above fares out of the state general fund, and this responsibility will change regardless of whether we have ridership increases. So we still need to work out the specific administrative processes for this with state budget staff. As you can see, we have a few years to do that. But we're pretty confident that this new legislation will impact not just Metro Mobility, but will help us relieve some of the pressures that we have on our transit budgets in the future overall. So that was really a pretty big accomplishment out of the 2021 legislative session. The other smaller piece of the MTS budget is the transportation planning budget. That budget has remained flat at about $6 million a year, as it has been over the past few years. This budget is primarily composed of transportation planning funding, which we then are required to match at 20%, but typically we provide an overmatch of funding to about 25 to 30% of the total program. I'm not going to go into any detail on the planning budget. We will be providing a very detailed overview of the 2022 and on program in early October when we bring our work plan forward. So I was not going to go into any of those details at this time. So unless there's any questions, we will let Ed Petrie and Heather Augustin-Huebner go into the transportation details. Thank you.
Any questions? Not seeing any.
Okay. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Amy. This is Ed Petrie. I'm Director of Finance, Metro Transit. I will go over some of the transportation, the budget building parameters, and then I will then hand it off to Heather, who will go into some of the financial details on the transportation budget. First of all, I'll talk about the basis for the budget development. The first part of the budget development is based upon Council's policies and actions. The first thing the Council does is they develop a service plan, which is one of the main factors that we use within our budget. The Council adopts the transportation performance standards in the transportation policy plan, and then all regional services are evaluated and measured against these transportation performance standards. This includes both Metropolitan Council services and suburban transit providers. As these routes are evaluated on an annualized basis, routes that are not meeting the standards are then up for potential changes and/or elimination. You probably heard us use a term frequently called harvest and reinvest. So for example, Metro Transit has a couple routes that are not hitting the transportation services, transportation policy plan statute level or the levels. We will then harvest those dollars and reinvest them into another route that will hopefully then meet the standards. In addition to that, we also do what's called an annual regional route performance analysis, where we will also look at all routes across the region. Another basis for the budget development is labor agreements. You're aware that we have labor agreements with ATU, TMSA, the LES, ASME, non-rep, etc. So all the factors that we currently know within each of those labor agreements are reflected in the proposed budget this evening. Another thing that the Council is very heavily involved in is fair policy and fair policy review. The Council does set the standards for regional fares because we do have a regional fare that is region-wide. The Council establishes those fares, and they're used by both Metropolitan Council services and regional transit provider services. Then these parameters are then used for any type of regional fare increases that we may have looking forward in the future. Another thing we use is a target fund balance policy, where it does promote financial management, responsible financial management of the transportation division. The Council has set target fund balances for each of the funds, and we are meeting and/or exceeding all those fund balances with our 2022 budget. The final thing that we'll talk quite a bit about in the budget this evening is called the federal relief funds. As you're aware, the Council did receive, through 3 different lettings, just over $725.8 million of federal funds that are to be used for transit operations. And those are funds that will be used between Council services and regional provider services. And we anticipate using these funds. We used some of the funds in 2020, 2021. We anticipate using these in 22, probably through about year 2024. Next slide, please. The next basis for budget development is forecasts and legislation. First of all, our preliminary budget has been reviewed with all state forecasts and with any of our internal financial plans. Many of you are aware that we actually do what's called a toolbox financial plan, where we will actually look at not only the current year operations, but forecast out for the next 2 bienniums for the next 4 years, based upon what we know from the state of Minnesota, whether it's on motor vehicle sales tax forecasts, state appropriations, and or what we know about labor contracts and or our costs. As Amy just mentioned, in Metro Mobility, we're very happy it became a separate state appropriation line this past last year, but also now became a state forecasted program started in fiscal year 26. One thing we do want to point out, though, is that we still do have a structural deficit. We've talked about that for quite a few years. We still will have a structural deficit on both bus and rail operations. Currently, we're forecasting with our forecasted financial plans that we've been able to push that structural deficit out with the use of federal funds and reserves out to about mid-year 2025. Some of the other financial considerations that we did talk about is, our general fund appropriations, which is from the state, motor vehicle sales tax forecast, again, the federal relief funds, and then our multi-year financial outlook. Next slide. Okay, moving on to some of the revenue sources. First of all, state general fund appropriations. This is appropriated by the legislature on a biennial basis. Per the legislation says it must cover 50% of the net operating assistance of light rail, but it does exclude the Metro Green Line extension. So it is only for current existing Blue and Green Line and for commuter rail operations. As we've talked about previously, state general fund basically covers metro mobility, light rail, commuter rail. There is none for base bus operations. Base bus operations uses motor vehicle sales tax. One of the challenges that we do have with the state general fund appropriation, which you'll see in the next slide, is the fact that with rail operations, for both rail and commuter rail operations, the base appropriation is flat for the next 4 years. So the state of Minnesota is not recognizing inflation. So that is one of the challenges that we will have, and that we will then have to go back to the legislature and potentially ask for an increase in state appropriations as a result of inflation. We've talked about Metro Mobility. It's become a forecasted services at 26, and we talked about motor vehicle sales tax for bus operations. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a slide that just basically lays out the dollar amounts for state fund appropriations. You can see the base amount for Metro Mobility is around $56 million, but as we've talked about, starting in state fiscal year 26, they will become a regular program that will be monitored. Light rail operations and commuter rail operations, that's what I just mentioned. Basically, those are flat operations. That's $25.5 million for light rail and $7.15 million for commuter rail. In the 2022 legislative session, we were lucky recipients. We did receive some additional funding from the state of Minnesota. We received $250,000 for our zero emission plan that we have to report back to the legislature coming up in February of 2022. We received $250,000 for a Highway 55 BRT study. And then we also received $57.5 million, which you passed this evening in the budget amendment. $40 million of that went to the E line, and $17.5 million of that went to the F line. Next slide, please. Okay, motor vehicle sales tax. Motor vehicle sales tax is, which you'll see when Heather goes through some of the financial numbers, is one of our largest revenue sources for the bus transportation division, or for bus transportation and transportation. We receive forecasts from the state of Minnesota in both February and November of each year. The budget that we're recommending this evening or bringing forward this evening is based upon the February forecast. The state of Minnesota will revise their forecast in November, so that will be one of the changes that you will see between tonight's budget and final adoption in December. For any years that are beyond the state of Minnesota's forecasted levels, we actually use numbers and forecasted levels from MnDOT, and we will match their parameters. As a result of the revenue volatility of motor vehicle sales tax, one of the things that the council has chosen to do is we budget 95% of motor vehicle sales tax forecasted receipts. Anything that we actually collect in excess of 95% will go into a motor vehicle sales tax reserve and be available for operations in the following year. One of the things we did talk about is motor vehicle sales tax is a volatile revenue source. It does follow the economy. Anytime you have an improvement in the economy, generally people will buy vehicles. You have strong motor vehicle sales tax receipts. If the economy starts taking a turn negatively, people will stop buying vehicles, receipts will go down. So that's one of the reasons why the council chose to budget 95%. One of the other things that we just want to point out that we do need a future dedicated and stable revenue source because of these volatilities in our revenues. Next slide. So as we track the financial outlook, as I talked about, we do a financial forecast, which is basically a 5-year forecast, which is looking at the current year and forecasting out the next 2 bienniums. With that forecast, we call it our toolbox. We actually we program and review state funding according to current state law, use the most current motor vehicle sales tax forecasts. With that, we will instruct or forecast our structural position. We will update this financial forecast every 6 months with the new motor vehicle sales tax forecast, and usually at the end of the legislative session. This forecast details all of our expense assumptions, use of reserves, and it also has what we call our tools that we potentially could implement and put into place if we are facing a deficit in future years. Some significant changes, though, that do impact our financial outlook, as I've talked about, is motor vehicle sales tax, passenger fares, as Wes had mentioned too, with passenger fares this coming year, this in 21, but also coming in 2022, that is one of our major volatile items within our budget, because we're not quite sure and confident where the ridership will be coming in at. As of this point in time, we forecasted 55% of our ridership coming back to pre-pandemic levels. That's one of the things that we will continue to evaluate and monitor. You'll also notice within our budget, we have significant one-time use of reserve funds and the federal relief funds. We are watching our service levels, but we do still have the financial cliff mid-year 2025. Next slide. We've talked about the federal relief funds. The council was a recipient of 3 different lettings of federal relief funds. The first letting was back in about April, May of 2020, $226.5 million coming from CARES. We then received in December of 2020 about just over $185.9 million in CRISA funds. And then this spring of 2021, we received just over $313 million of ARP money to total just over $725 million. These funds will be used for both council transportation operations and with regional providers. The funds have been awarded to the council based upon federal formulas and following the 5307 federal formula guidelines, with an emphasis on payroll and transit operating expenses. One of the main things with all these funds is the grantees must follow the federal rules and guidelines. Next slide. With the federal relief funds, our allocation strategy was once again to be consistent with the federal goals, clear and transparent, easy to explain, but also then use it to balance our budgets in 2022. Our preliminary budgets, they're balanced, but they do include the program use of federal funds. Next slide. So with our overall budget framework, which Heather will go through, as we go through and we budget up, roll up our major revenues and our expense categories. We do have type parameters on the budget development, which would include all the different inflation factors. We do have anticipated revenue growth on motor vehicle sales tax, which is from the state of Minnesota, what we're anticipating for fares and state appropriations. We haven't reflected the current labor contracts and service contracts we have in place, and the COVID impact on operations, which would include a continued cleaning of stations, platforms, and facilities. As Mr. Koister had mentioned, we're forecasting 95% bus service levels in 2022, plus Orange Line and D Line. Running about 100% service on the Metro Blue and Green, and with North Star running 4 trips in the morning and 4 trips in the evening with no weekend service. As Amy mentioned, Metro Mobility will be returning to pre-pandemic levels. And then as Mr. Koister mentioned, we do have increasing investments in customer experience, security, facility upkeep, and technology. Next slide. Some of the things that we do put into place to mitigate any revenue and expense volatility in our budget, as I've talked about, we budget 95% of the motor vehicle sales tax. Anything above that goes into reserves to be used in the next year. We do fuel price hedge for Metro Transit fuel. We are a consumer. We consume just over 7 million gallons of diesel fuel on an annualized basis. So we do fuel price hedge, so we have budget certainty on our fuel costs. As we've talked about, we're programming federal relief funds. Heather will go into that. And we are using operating fund reserve targets. Next slide. Okay, Heather.
Sure. So again, Heather Augustin-Hebner, Finance Director for MTS and CD. So Amy and Ed and Wes gave a great preview about Metro Mobility. It's really one of the good news stories for this year. Having a separate state appropriation funding line for Metro Mobility was great, and knowing that it's going to be forecasted is even better. It's going to take a lot of the pressure off the broader transportation system. It still leaves a structural deficit, as Ed mentioned, but it certainly is one piece of the solution that we wanted to put in place. Like the rest of the transit budget, we're programming federal money in Metro Mobility in this year, and ridership is returning to pre-pandemic levels. Ridership, a lot of our riders on Metro Mobility are really transit dependent, and this is their only source of of mobility. So a lot of the times when you see variations up or down on regular or on other forms of our modes of transit ridership, Metro Mobility really comes back a lot sooner than the other modes, and that's what we're seeing now. One of the other, Ed mentioned that we have a lot of risks in our budget. One of the big risks we have, specifically in the Metro Mobility budget, is our gasoline. Right now, we budgeted at $3 a gallon. Futures are looking at about $3.30 a gallon, and just kind of rule of thumb, if the fuel prices go up or down a quarter, that's about $1 million impact. So that's one of the risks we're watching really, really closely in Metro Mobility. Next slide, please. All right, so the next couple slides, you're going to see Metro Transit and MTS ridership. You're going to see what happens with COVID. We were trucking along pretty well, and COVID hits and ridership drops, and we're still trying to figure out in our crystal ball what's going to happen with ridership. In 2022, the Metro Transit ridership is estimated at 42 million right now. And I think Wes and Ed already covered where we're at. We're anticipating 55% ridership levels compared to pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. So contracted services, this is the MTS side of the house. On the bus side, we have the same assumptions that Metro Transit does. The change is going to be those blue bars at the bottom that represents Metro Mobility ridership. So you're going to see that in 2020, it was low. We crept up a bit in 21. Ridership is very slowly but continuously coming back. And if you look at those bars, the 2019 actuals and 2020 proposed are really close. We're going to monitor that, and it's one of the items that may change before the final budget is adopted. Next slide, please. All right, this is a budget of risks, and we're tracking them really closely. We're looking at what's happening with ridership and the travel demand. That's going to impact our fare revenue. We budget the motor vehicle sales tax forecast, and the forecast is the forecast until it changes. We know there's a new forecast coming in November, and we'll make sure that's reflected in our final budget. Operator hiring continue. It's a challenging environment to hire staff, and Metro Transit is feeling that. MTS is feeling that. We're going to continue to keep an eye on that and see just how that's going to impact our operations. We're all closely watching what's going on with COVID and the Delta variant and other changes that might potentially come. We're having daily, weekly conversations about what that looks like. And because of that, we are in this continuous cycle of making sure we're paying attention to what's going on in our region nationally, so that we can accurately, or as accurately as we can, reflect that in our budget. Next slide, please. So when you put the whole transportation division budget together, we come in at about $651 million. Metro Transit bus is about 60% of the budget, followed by light rail and Metro Mobility at 14 and 15%, and then you'll see our other slices of service come in there at slightly smaller amounts. You're going to see on the uses by category, it's an investment based upon service model type. So on the Metro Transit side of the house, you're going to see the investment in our people. There are bus drivers, our mechanics, the people that make our system work. On the MTS side of the house, you're going to see a high investment in contracted services and a much lower staff cost, just because it's a different service model. We're paying for RA allocations for all of the services that we've talked about in other divisions, and we always have a big investment in fuel. Next slide, please. So our sources, Marie and Ed both mentioned this in their presentation, that the story of this year on the funding side is we have $131 million of federal funding, and nearly all of that, or at least the very vast majority of that, is federal COVID relief money. That is really helping our system and systems across the nation weather the storm. 61% of our money comes from state sources, either motor vehicle sales tax, which Ed walked you through, or state general fund, which funds Metro Mobility and our rail system. The local, the light blue column, or the light blue slice, is representing of our local county partners who help fund our transitway system. And then about 10% of our funding comes from fares. Next slide, please. All right, and Madam Chair, this concludes our presentation of the 2022 preliminary budget the 2022 preliminary operating budget and levies. We'll be back next meeting asking for the council to adopt these proposals on on August 25th. And with that, we'd be happy to stand for any questions you may have.
That's great. Wow, what a presentation. Are there any questions? I am seeing no hands being raised or voices. Oh, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you to everybody. I think this is my third budget now. Kind of lost my sense of where we're at with COVID, but it's really straightforward. The teamwork that goes, into this deep within the organization, you make it look really simple and it's so transparent, but I know it's such a lot of hard work. I know there's a good amount of risk and estimates in this, but I'm so confident in this budget that you've all put together. And I think year over year, we're doing exactly what we need to be doing. And again, I do want to give a shout out to the government affairs team and everybody on staff and at the council who really worked hard at the legislature this year so that we had some relief there, especially for Metro Mobility. So I think it's a great budget. And unless there's something else that a council member would say that would persuade me to vote differently, I'm fully supportive of where this is going and look forward to, voting for it preliminarily and the final vote later this year.
I think this is a great overview. And one of the things I appreciated was the telling of the story in addition to the numbers, because it really puts the pieces together to help us understand. I think that approving the budget, this is the first look, and I think it's one of the biggest and most important responsibilities of the council is approving the budget for the upcoming year. So understanding this and having handle is truly very important. It's really exciting to see how forward-looking all of the departments are and the work that is being done and the ability to pivot in times of crisis, which we certainly have had to face. So it's just been an excellent overview. And again, we'll have additional opportunities to look at this and many opportunities, take any opportunity. There is the list of anyone to contact on the final slide if you have questions. And I echo what Councilmember Johnson said as well, as far as taking really complex departments and financial information and stories and putting it into understandable pieces for us to have confidence in what we were looking at, understanding it, and being able to look forward to approving it. Are there other comments or questions at this time? I know we went over a little bit, but it's really important information. Anybody else? Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I agree. I appreciate the comprehensive presentation and keeping us up to date with enough detail for us to understand what the plan is. Being forward thinking is really important in order for us to meet both our short-term, medium, and long-term goals. This budget should stretch us, and I like the balance with the types of goals that are being set. I'm especially interested in the 2050 development guide, and I like the choices that have been selected for focus, the community profiles redesign. I'm very interested in that and been talking to researchers about how we can improve that information and then expand on it, as well as the development trends. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other comments or questions at this point? If not, I'll ask if there are any council members who have reports that they would like to share. I don't see a lot of hands raised, so then let's move on to the regional administrator, Ms. Bogie. Do you have a report for us this evening?
Madam Chair, just a quick update. Some of you may have seen that the governor issued a mandatory vaccine for state employees. We're taking a look at that now with our incident command team and looking at the impacts in our bargaining units and across our organization. So we'll take a little bit of time to review that and we'll get back to the council with what our direction will be.
Thank you. In General Counsel, Ms. Bloodhart, do you have any report for us this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no report.
All right. If there is no further business, thank you all, and thank you for the wonderful presentations this evening. It's been a great meeting, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Molly.
Thanks for chairing, Molly.
You bet.
Great job.